One egg, hundreds of sperm. Each one a living cell, and each one carrying vital information regarding the future, not only of themselves, but now of the world. For very soon, the product of fertilisation will begin making its own individual demands on all the cycles of life, the minerals which make this living world go round. Every day across the world, at least 400,000 such happy events are taking place. A new person in the making, each one compounding the problems of an exploding population. For each one has the same human rights to his or her fair share of the Earth's resources. A map showing how the world's population has grown over the past 2,000 years. Red for the rich countries, green for the poor. At first, the population grew slowly, but just watch it explode since 1900. And look where it's heading in the next 40 years. In order for us to live a perfectly normal, healthy life, we need about 2,000 calories a day. And of course, it comes to us ready packaged in food. And there it is, a nice lot of carbohydrate, roughage, energy-rich fats and oils, and a little bit of body-building protein. And in there's enough to feed a third world family of 4 for a whole week. A perfectly balanced, healthy diet. Now compare that to what the average family of 4 eats in a week here in Britain. And believe it or not, in calorific terms, they're about the same, although the dietary values are somewhat different. But the real difference is, of course, the method of production. All this is locally produced, whereas all this is produced all over the world. And it's the method of production, high input agriculture, transport, freezing, thawing, and of course packaging. So the real difference between that and that is energy. Any form of food production uses energy. In its simplest form, human and animal muscle, the calories in the food they eat. In comparison, monster machines use megacalories of fossil fuel. The amount of energy needed to keep one person going through an average lifetime is represented by this pile of coal. And it doesn't matter whether that person lives in the rich first or the poor third world. That's the amount of energy they need to keep body and soul together for 75 years. Unfortunately today, fewer and fewer people in the third world are even getting that much. Whereas in the rich first world, things are different. Yes, we all eat, and many of us eat too much. But we also use energy in many different ways. I mean, we burn it to keep ourselves warm, to keep ourselves cool in the summer, all in transportation, entertainment, communication. And this pile of coal represents the amount of energy used in a lifetime by Mr. or Mrs. Average in the rich first world. And of course, all the time, our whole lifestyles demand us to use more and more. Yes, the staggering anomaly is that the 20% of the people living at the rich end of the world are abusing 80% of the resources, while the 80% living at the poor end of the world have to get by on the 20% that's left. And many of the resources are beginning to run out, while in places population is increasing out of control. No wonder some people in the world are worried, and we should be. Live Aid and other such occasions are at least a demonstration of the rich world's concern for the poorest people of their planet. And this is where many of them are found, a diversity of people living amongst all the most diverse living system on Earth, tropical rainforest, which has over time become part of all those cycles of life, of water, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, sulphur and phosphorus. And because of efficient recycling, this living system has been able to exploit everything the tropics has to offer in a sustainable way. And yet all this is set against a background of slow climatic change. Why, only 20,000 years ago, when the Earth's greenhouse was some 5 degrees centigrade cooler than it is today, and much of the temperate latitudes were covered with ice, much of the world's rainforest was open savanna and grassland, with forests only along the rivers and in the wettest places. It was during the Ice Age that people arrived on the Amazonian scene, hunting and gathering in the savannas. As the climate grew wetter and the forests returned, they gradually adapted their lifestyles to become part of the diversity of the forest. So when Amazonas was first explored by the Portuguese around 1500 AD, there were an estimated 7 to 8 million people living in nearly 200 tribes as part of the forest system. By 1960, Brazil alone had a population of 70 million, growing at a rate of 2.3 million a year. The richest 5% lived in luxury, while millions whose grandparents had lived self-sufficient lives in the rainforest crowded into the shantytown, desperate for work. What could be done to right the wrongs and quell the rising social unrest? The answer appeared simple to the new military government and to the aid agencies and banks who advanced them the money. Develop the resources of the Amazon basin. Move the landless out of the drought-stricken farmlands and into the forest. Provide them with the land which they could clear and burn to grow food for themselves and to raise crops for export in order to service the mounting international debt. Some 20 years later, after an investment of $2.9 billion, an area of forest twice the size of Switzerland had been burned to make way for ranch land. This vast area provided less than 500 real permanent jobs and still left Brazil as a net importer of beef. 95% of the 17 million people who'd hoped for a better life swelled the population of the shanty towns. The poor got poorer and the rich got richer. The glitterati relaxed while international debt went up through the roof. Survival International has been working for 21 years to try to bring these facts to the attention of the world. There could be no sadder coming-of-age party than to have to gather in Covent Garden to paint the tribal patterns and quote the names of more than 187 tribes which have already been lost to extinction in Amazonas alone.
Guamonte, Guanano, Guanare, Guanarena, Guanieco.
187 tribes disappeared. Now, every one of the people of those tribes were part of the diversity of the human race, but also they were part of the intimate knowledge of the human race about sustainable lifestyle. Once that information is gone, it's gone forever, and any hope of a sustainable future goes with it. We must stop this destruction now. Yes, there is recurrent drought in sub-Saharan Africa, and the rich world, always a little bit too late, keeps dipping into its massive profits to pour in aid. But how many of us stop to think why it's happening, or to ask pertinent questions like, where have all Ethiopia's woodlands and sustainable lifestyles gone? And why, despite all that death and misery, is her population doubling every 34 years? And why is the same thing happening in so many other places across this world? Wherever we look across the third world, we find that population pressure is destroying age-old ways of life. And it all boils down to the fact that more and more people have to try and live off the same area of land. And so the natural vegetation which used to hold the landscapes and those livelihoods together disappear with catastrophic results. Here, sustainable lifestyles have been carved out of summer dry forest in North Africa. The now dominant argana tree plays an important role, producing nuts in plenty. These are opened with difficulty, and the kernels, after blanching, are ground to produce oil for cooking and lighting. Fodder, cut from a variety of trees higher up the slopes, is carried down to feed the stock, and the twigs and faggots are then used to cook bread made from last year's crop of wheat. The crops have already been planted, and there's little more the farmers can do except keep the irrigation channels open and wait. It always has been a game of chance, but every year with more and more mouths to feed, there is no spare land to be held in fallow, and the joker in the pack is when the rain fails. Goats hereabout have always enjoyed browsing high on the argana, and it is said that the oil-rich nuts cannot germinate unless they pass through the gut of a herbivore. But now, with all the flat land under wheat, they can only graze the bearing hill slopes, where the pickings get less and less each year, and erosion gets worse and worse. This is the end of the road for them, the wildlife and the local people. And if the rains fail again, as they did between 1981 and 1984, and no aid is forthcoming, then these people will have to join the drift to the towns. It's not just starvation and landlessness that brings desperately poor people to the city. It's the lure of the good life and everything that goes with it. Access to many new and wonderful things, the whole world of wrap-around instant entertainment, faster transport, new types of food and drink, a more exciting way of life. You see, the city streets are their shop window into our world. It's the glitter which continues to seduce people and nations to jump on our bandwagon of unsustainability. And to do it, they have to earn money. Hard money, foreign exchange. So they become the victims of fluctuations in world commodity prices. Crops for export are always grown on the best land. Big mechanised estates in the hands of a few rich people. There are no longer even many labouring jobs for the dispossessed tenants. The poor farmers and their expanding families are pushed out more and more onto the marginal land, which can't sustain them however hard they work. More and more landscapes are destroyed and the sustainable lifestyles of the people they used to support head for the wall of extinction. The only real growth phenomena at the end of the 20th century are these. Soil erosion now threatening 1/3 of the total land surface area of the world. Third world debt, all approaching $150,000 billion, and some banks say completely out of control. A human population exploding across 5 billion people, and in the not too far distant future, more than half of those are going to live in towns and cities, and fewer have got a chance of a decent job. Desert, debt, the demography of despair. And the root cause of all these problems is the fact that more and more land and the people it used to support is being taken out of the rural economy based on solar power and plugged into the first world, which is already using 80% of the total resources of planet Earth. An area of vegetation almost twice the size of Switzerland is destroyed every year, while unpaid international debts make a nonsense of the world banking system, Zurich, gnomes and all. On the flanks of some of Europe's highest mountains, the Ice Age hasn't yet come to an end. So lucky people from the rich set of the world can come and ski here 12 months of the year. A perch in paradise, half in Italy, half in Switzerland. You see, here in the high Alps, many nations and many cultures meet. And in the past, each one of these valleys had their own customs and even their own languages. And thousands of people made a diverse living from this harsh landscape. Today, sadly, all of that is being swept away. The people once made their living from this difficult terrain, gathering fruits and seeds and hunting its animals. In time, they created the Alps, the flower-filled meadows and pastures. These nurtured their milk, butter and a diversity of cheese with fragrant grass and hay. All the manure was recycled to keep the crop allowing. No need for fertiliser, for ploughing or replanting. A diverse grassland, part of a diverse landscape, part of a diverse way of life. But all that has changed. The ski industry now dominates the land and the lifestyles of the people of the Alps. To service the immense transient population of pleasure seekers, tiny rural villages have become rip-roaring townscapes. Huge investments of borrowed money have been poured into skis, ski lifts, hotels, hoists and tows, which spew the visitors out across the eroding mountainsides. Sadly, these alpine meadows and woodlands are no longer part of a balanced rural economy, and so they're no longer being looked after properly. Add to that all the new ski road, drag lines, and of course super acid rain, and more of the trees are beginning to die. And so you see they have to build these enormous, ugly avalanche barriers to nip the new lifestyles onto the sides of the mountains. The debts are mounting out of control. The pressure is on to build more lifts and more hotels to service those lifts and keep them economically full of tourists. But one bad season means that the interest on those debts can't be met, and ski resort after ski resort is now in trouble. Parts of their world, yes, our world, and it's the only one we've got, are beginning to fall to pieces. And if the Earth's greenhouse is getting hotter, ski seasons and world debt certainly won't improve. Meanwhile, the landscape is being eroded and changed out of all recognition. If this was the third world, we might call these shantytowns. So, apart from starvation, all the problems of the third world can be found right here in the alpine heartlands of Europe, glitterati and all. A joke. What's the difference between a pigeon and a yuppie? Well, a pigeon can always put a small deposit on a Porsche, whatever the state of the world's economy. And this isn't a joke, so please listen carefully. What's the difference between a pigeon, someone in the third world, and a yuppie, someone in the first world? Well, I tell you, the person in the third world is always going to be able to go back to their sustainable roots much more easily than us lot. You see, it's all a case of needs and wants. Their needs can be sustained, our wants just can't. The only thing that the first world has got right is that its rate of population increase is slowing down, and in more and more developed countries, it's almost stable. This hasn't come out of altruism, but out of education and comfortable consumerism. Rich people are investing in their present, not their future. So why burden yourself with more than 2 children when you can afford a second week skiing for all the family and all the paraphernalia that goes with it? Of course, it's a gross oversimplification, but you know, in essence, it's true. It's also true that the main suggestion that's been put forward to bring down the rate of population increase in the third world down to our level is that we bring them up to our standard of living. And who can deny them those same rights, those same opportunities? Access to the silver bullets of modern medicine, use of their own landscapes, their own resources, their own labour force, burning their own fossil fuels, polluting our environment. But who's doing the polluting? The population explosion is now in the green third world, but it's us in the rich red first world that's gobbling up all those resources. Imagine the world as a gigantic garden full of all those natural systems, the tropical rainforest garden, the temperate forest garden, grasslands, tundra and semi-desert, all overflowing with goodies. Now, each one of those natural systems was plugged into the sun, and each one helped make and hold the soil on the catchment and keep all those cycles of nitrogen, of sulphur, of carbon and water in absolute balance. And they did it all free, gratis and for nothing. And that was the way of the world until agriculture came on the scene about 15,000 years ago. And that's all we've got left as we approach the 21st century. We stand at the brink of an unmitigated disaster because all the rest is powered by unrenewable fossil fuel and unsustainable production of timber and food. We've already disrupted those cycles of nitrogen, sulphur, phosphorus and carbon. We're using half the rain that falls upon the land and half of the evolved photosynthetic capacity of planet Earth. And in 40 years' time, our population is going to have doubled. And yet we're still standing around arguing how much of the rest of the Garden of Eden we can destroy before we put the rest back into working order. The answer is no more. The nations of the world must join together to halt the destruction of any more of the world's natural systems, be it Amazonas or Antarctica. We must take action to reduce third world debt and pour investment into development projects which allow poor people to continue to make a long-term living on their own land. We should immediately start to put the rest of our landscape back into working order, beginning right in our own backyards. Hampsley Forest in County Durham, and it's a working forest producing timber and pulp for use here in Britain. And yet it's an amazingly diverse bit of real estate. 265 different sorts of plants have been found growing within its confines, and that includes 102 different types of trees. 120 plus birds visit the area, and the list goes up all the time. And when it was recently surveyed to see how important the area was for creepy crawlies, snails and insects and things, it came out with a phenomenal score of 3,110. Now, you only need a score of 200 to make it a SSSI, a Site of Special Scientific Interest. So perhaps you can understand why 150,000 people came here last year just to see it. And that's the ones who actually paid. Now, it was all planted by people, created by people, and it's managed now by the Forestry Commission. So you see, given a chance, nature can ride again. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be wasting your time. We can stop pollution and recycle all those raw materials, especially the phosphates. We can plug into those sources of sustainable energy which do least damage to the natural world. And we can all do our bit to save energy. The seals are back on seal sands just over there, and they're doing well. And I think that above all gives me heart that we really can solve the problem. We can put all those cycles back into working order with the help of big industry. And I tell you, it's not just the seals, but it's the fact that in this industrial Teesside, the largest chemical industrial complex in the whole world, there's plenty of green space, something unofficial, but other bits of habitat now being put back into working order with the help of industry and the local conservationists. So much so that more bird watchers come here to see birds migrating through than they do in all the nature reserves up and down this stretch of coast. That's why I believe we're going to make it work. But one thing still worries me. Despite all those problems, the world's population still increases by 250,000 every day. So my plea is for free contraception for all who want it. Every child a wanted child, every child able to play his or her own part in building a sustainable future. One egg, hundreds of sperm, each one a living cell and each one carrying vital information regarding the future not only of themselves but now of the world. For very soon the product of fertilisation will begin making its own individual demands on all the cycles of life, the minerals which make this living world go round. Every day across the world, at least 400,000 such happy events are taking place. A new person in the making, each one compounding the problems of an exploding population. For each one, fats and oils and a little bit of body-building protein. And in there's enough to feed a third world family of 4 for a whole week. A perfectly balanced, healthy diet. Now compare that to what the average family of 4 eats in a week here in Britain. And believe it or not, in calorific terms, they're about the same, although the dietary values are somewhat different. But the real difference is, of course, the method of production. All this is locally produced, whereas all this is produced all over the world. And it's the method of production, high input agriculture, transport, freezing, thawing, and of course, packaging. So the real difference between that and that is energy. Any form of food production uses energy. In its simplest form, human and animal muscle, the calories in the food they eat. Income has the same human rights to his or her fair share of the Earth's resources. A map showing how the world's population has grown over the past 2,000 years. Red for the rich countries, green for the poor. At first, the population grew slowly, but just watch it explode since 1900. And look where it's heading in the next 40 years. In order for us to live a perfectly normal, healthy life, we need about 2,000 calories a day. And of course, it comes to us ready packaged in food. And there it is, a nice lot of carbohydrate, roughage, energy in transportation, entertainment, communication. And this pile of coal represents the amount of energy used in a lifetime by Mr. or Mrs. Average in the rich first world. And of course, all the time, our whole lifestyles demand us to use more and more. Yes, the staggering anomaly is that the 20% of the people living at the rich end of the world are abusing 80% of the resources, while the 80% living at the poor end of the world have to get by on the 20% that's left. And many of the resources are beginning to run out, while in places population is increasing out of control. No wonder some people in the world are worried, and we should be. Harrison monster machines use mega calories of fossil fuel. The amount of energy needed to keep one person going through an average lifetime is represented by this pile of coal. And it doesn't matter whether that person lives in the rich first or the poor third world. That's the amount of energy they need to keep body and soul together for 75 years. Unfortunately today, fewer and fewer people in the third world are even getting that much. Whereas in the rich first world, things are different. Yes, we all eat, and many of us eat too much. But we also use energy in many different ways. I mean, we burn it to keep ourselves warm, to keep ourselves cool in the summer, or